Yo, Lord Willin, Jeff Canarsie, Mob Talk Radio. Check it out. Yo, we stay quiet like Russell Buffalino when things will get ugly like Pepsi's death in Casino. Who do we know? No one, nobody. But we're all well respected like Della Croce and Gotti. I know wild nights, Havana nocturne. Light up a cigar and watch your spot burn. You'll get patty whacked, I'm tough like Irish dock workers. Rubber guys with guys, hooligans and block lurkers. Corner berserkers, street savvy soldiers. You owe, you better pay. Don't make me say I told you. Code you don't betray, I say what I mean. Providence and Brooklyn all the way to the Bean. I'd rather be unseen, like Vinny the Chin. I don't gotta go to Vegas to see cities of sin. Pull the pin, drop bombs like Danny Green. I write homicide like the murder machine. Lansky Luciano, mastermind the racket. Up in the clam house with $1 million in my jacket. Move around when the streets get darker. Pay homage to real bosses like Gambino and Patriarcha. Mob talking, but you don't talk to the mob. Lord Will and Jeff Canarsie, we stay on our job. This is Mob Talk, straight from the streets. Mob Talk, the life over beats. Lord Will and Jeff Canarsie, bringing you the real. Kill all rats, you already know the deal. This is Mob Talk, straight.
It's time for Mob Talk Radio with your host, Jeff Canarsie.
I'm going to tell you something. If you two ever bother me again the rest of my life, I ain't giving them attention. I can't. There's good friends of mine out on the say. Well, he's the boss, you have to do his stuff. That's why I said to you before, you don't understand what the money is. I also know that the boss is your boss.
And welcome to Mob Talk Radio. If you are new to this channel, do me a favor. Like and subscribe and share. That's the best thing you can do for us. If you want to donate to the show, the information is right down at the bottom of the screen. Now, before we get going, I want to be sort of kind of clear about why I'm actually going to be covering this. And the reality of it is for me. Let me see if I can. There we go. The reality is for me. Anytime we get into talking about RICO laws, RICO cases, it always applies to organized crime. And in this case, it's going to be no different. For those of you that know and those of you that don't, I would like you to go over to Wrestling with the Devil with Lee Cole III. Lee has been really, really pounding Vince McMahon for a long time, for years. And he's doing it again actively, but he has a lot of material to work with because of the lawsuits and everything that has been brought in against Vince McMahon. And I have been on Lee's channel a couple of times to talk about this, but the one thing that I wanted to kind of do is I'm not going to go over the lawsuit. I want to go over specifically what I think he's going to be charged with. And the reason why I'm doing it is because Vince McMahon, you can really draw parallels between Vince McMahon and organized crime. Vince McMahon, for a lack of better terms, is like a mob boss in many different ways, in many different aspects. And I'm not going to sit here today and go through all of those things. You can go over to Lee's channel and watch all the times I've been on and we've actually talked about this. I don't want to regurgitate that, but I just want to show the parallel between Vince McMahon and the laws that are going to be used against him. Now, I'm not an attorney, number one. I'm not a federal prosecutor, number two. But I know enough about RICO laws. I know enough about this case to kind of see where it's going. This is not a wrestling channel. This is an organized crime channel. And like I said, this draws parallels between organized crime. And that's why I'm discussing it. And I also want to show you how they're going to weave racketeering charges likely against Vince McMahon. Now, one of the things and one of the debated things that sort of I had on Lee's show amongst myself, James Proctor, and a couple other guys that were on the show is everybody has a different opinion and universally acceptable. Nobody knows exactly verbatim what exactly is going to happen in this particular case. But the RICO law was instituted back in the 1970s, and it was mainly derived and used to go after organized crime and basically prove conspiracy charges, triple the time, money, damages, etc. It was a way for the government to dismantle the mafia. Now, while it was initially instituted to use against organized crime, we have seen this now being used against big business, big pharmacy companies, and et cetera, which is really what the law was meant to be originally, but they just used it mainly against organized crime. But we're seeing this used against government entities now more than ever. And for Vince, this is going to be a big problem. And I kind of wanted to go through what I think some of these charges are going to be and sort of explain why, because I think people get very confused on what makes a RICO predicate act, what makes a RICO case. And the thing about at the federal level, just so everybody understands, at the state level, you need less to convict somebody of a crime than you do at the federal level. The federal level I'm trying to think of how I can word this to make it more palatable or seem more understanding. But basically, at the state level, you have to prove a lot more through evidence that somebody did something versus the government. At the government level, you really only have to prove that it's likely that somebody did it. So the prerequisites for a federal case are a lot looser than state cases, but there are also state RICO charges and there are also government RICO charges. So we're going to talk about that a little bit today. Once again, I'm not jumping into the wrestling thing. I'm not trying to step on anybody's toes. I just wanted to talk about the law because a couple of times that I was on Lee's show, when you deal with people that don't understand the law, and I'm not saying they don't understand it, what I simply mean is when their expertise or their knowledge level isn't as deep as mine when it comes to RICO, I think sometimes things can get lost in translation. And I also think when you go on any show, be it mine, Lee's, or whoever's, you sort of have to dummy down the legalese and you have to explain exactly what it is, because I think the RICO law can really be confusing. So what we're going to do today is talk about the big problem that Vince McMahon is about to have. And I think with the way that I sort of wrote this up, I think it's going to be a lot more palatable and easier to understand. Now, that doesn't mean by any stretch of the imagination that Vince is going to face these particular set of charges. But when I started looking at the RICO laws and what they could charge him with, I think I have what is the shell basis of the way they're going to go after him. So that's what we are going to do today. After the show, please do me a favor, like, share, and subscribe, or donate if you want. So we're going to jump right into this. And I've got a couple of things I'm going to show. No videos or anything like that, but Vince McMahon is in serious shit right now. And while many of you know who Vince McMahon is, I mean, how could you not, right? And there's a lot of allegations that are swirling around him right now. And believe it or not, this is a real problem for him, a real big problem. And I don't want to stereotype anybody, but I don't think the wrestling community understands it. I mean, they may understand it on a sort of intellectual level, but they don't understand how bad this really truly is. And the sort of spokes that can jump from all of this and the amount of people that can be in serious trouble because of this. And yes, it all started from a civil litigation. And we're not going to regurgitate all of that civil litigation between Janelle Grant and Vince McMahon. But the fact is, back in May, the feds, the FBI, asked Janelle Grant to pause her civil litigation against Vince McMahon. And the reason why somebody would do that is because they don't want to overlap cases, and maybe they don't want specifics that are involved in Janelle Grant's case to be that broad. So in other words, the FBI has stuff that they're not yet talking about. There's probably witnesses they have yet to name, people they've yet to name, and they just don't want two cases going on at once, which tells you the seriousness and the veracity of the FBI when it comes to Vince McMahon. And that's one of the things that I think people don't understand. This is not just a matter of a wrestling conglomerate who was sleeping around and made some mistakes. This goes way beyond that, way beyond that. And I think the average wrestling fan either loves Vince or they hate Vince and they refuse to believe certain things. But today, this might change the way people think about some things. So, like I said, we're not going to talk about the civil litigation between Janelle Grant and McMahon, but the fact that the FBI asked her to pause her lawsuit is big, because the FBI always wants to sort of have all of the cameras on them, all the press on them. But I think there are things in both the civil case and the federal case that will be coming at some point that sort of contrast each other. And I don't think the feds want anything interrupting that. Also, I'll just say this at the top. I do not believe an indictment's coming any day. I just don't believe that's the case, especially if you look at May as an example. If the feds were ready to indict, Vince McMahon would have been indicted already. Now, was there grand juries? Absolutely. But we're talking about such a voluminous case that it just isn't as simple as, okay, we've got 12 charges, let's go to a jury. It just doesn't work like that. And I think back in May, Vince has been under investigation for almost a year and a half now. I don't think this is going to drop until the fall. I really don't. And I think there's a lot of different reasons for that. I think just the sheer amount of volume from the evidence standpoint, I think there's a lot of volume financially they're looking at. And I also think there's a lot of people talking. And I think anytime you have a case, maybe they have like 3 or 4 predicate acts or 3 or 4 charges, and all of a sudden it then balloons into something else, even bigger. That's why you haven't seen an official indictment come down. And I don't think it's going to be any day. I could be totally wrong about that. Don't put your money on betting on me on that. I just don't think this is coming until the fall. And there's a reason why I believe that. I'm not going to get into that today, but I do think this is going to be something that's going to drop in the fall. I don't think we're going to see it this month. I don't think we're going to see it next month. I think this is going to be like a September, October sort of deal, but we'll see. If I'm right, I'm right. If I'm wrong, then I'll say I'm wrong. I just think this is a lot bigger than a lot of people sort of understand. And like I said at the top, I'm only covering this because I want to show how the feds operate, and I want to show how businesses at the business level, people can get indicted under RICO laws. Now, do I know that they're going to indict him under RICO laws? No. There's nothing to technically substantiate that claim that I'm making. So I'm not saying I'm right, but this is where I think it's going to go. So for those that know, Vince was indicted by the feds back in 1993. And we know this to be the steroid trial. Vince was supplying steroids to his wrestlers through Dr. George Zahorian. Zahorian was actually contracted by Vince and would supply steroids to the WWE/WWF wrestlers, and he often did so at Titan Towers, specifically in McMahon's office. Eventually, as we know, Zahorian gets caught and he ends up flipping on McMahon. Vince would be charged with conspiring to distribute steroids, possession of illegal steroids with the intent to distribute, and embezzlement for allegedly using money from Titan Sports Incorporated to purchase illegal steroids. And I want you to focus on that because this is a revolving theme with Vince McMahon. Once again, he was charged with embezzlement for allegedly using money from Titan Sports Incorporated to purchase illegal steroids. So in other words, he's using corporation money to purchase something that is illegal. And the reason why one would do that is because they don't want their personal name or their personal finances attached to that, because then that's a huge red flag and that's how you get caught. But if you weave it through your corporation and write it off as something else, that's what has a tendency to work better for money laundering purposes, which we're going to get into today as well. McMahon only escapes that trial and escapes prison because the wrestlers went to bat for him out of fear. Because at the time, WWE or WWF was the biggest company around. And going against Vince McMahon meant that if he doesn't get convicted, you're never going to work in his company again. And this is why a lot of wrestlers lied for him over the years, why they continue to do it. McMahon would escape that, but Dr. Zahorian didn't. He would do 3 years in prison for that. The feds knew at the time that McMahon was fully complicit in that, and I don't think they've forgotten it. However, I want you to focus on, like the charge I said earlier, using money from Titan Sports Incorporated to purchase illegal steroids. And that sort of directly correlates to Janelle Grant now. So I want to present something else really quick. Let's see. All right, let me pull this up. All right. There we go. All right. So on June 30th, okay, and this was in the Janelle Grant, and well, this wasn't a Janelle Grant issue. This was an investigation that went on. Everybody knows about this, but I don't have the year written down, so forgive me for this. But on June 30th, the company incurred $5.3 million and $7.1 million, respectively, of expenses related to costs incurred in connection with a separate investigation by a special committee created by the company's board. To date, Vince McMahon has paid approximately $17.4 million to reimburse the company for costs that have been incurred and paid by the company. So what he's essentially done is paid off all of these women using company money. And you can't do that. That is a federal crime. And he did essentially what he did using his company for hush money and payments to women just to keep them quiet. If you go back to what we said earlier, using money from Titan Sports Incorporated to purchase illegal steroids. He's done this before. This is nothing new for him. But the problem is it's a federal crime to do that, especially when your company is a publicly traded company. And that breaks about 1 million different SEC rules. And so he knows it's wrong, but he does it anyway. It's simply, I don't want to attach my personal finances or my name to this. Let's use the company money and I'll just pay you back. You can't do that. And you can't tell me that Vince is a dumb guy. He's a smart guy, and you can't tell me he's that stupid. The problem here is Vince gets caught doing it. He thought he could borrow money from the business and then pay it back like nothing ever happened. And I largely suspect two things here. Number one, he wanted to use company money so that there could be no proof that he wrote personal checks, no proof that attaches him to these payoffs. If there's no proof of payoffs, he can't get sued. He can't be investigated. You know, checks from a business can be written off the books. They can be manipulated to show costs here and there without drawing a lot of speculation. And I think he also did it to hide it from his wife, Linda McMahon, who I know they're not together and haven't been for years, but he has to do this to keep his image intact. He does not want anything attached to this because it creates bad press. It's an image thing. And the problem for Vince is when Janelle Grant begins to speak, it perks the federal government's ears. And this went from civil litigation to now a full-blown federal investigation. And there are rumors of sex trafficking charges coming, but I think it's a lot bigger than that. And anytime an indictment is coming, right, prosecutors have to decide early on whether or not we're going to use state or federal charges. And usually at the beginning, they decide, okay, this is going to be state charges. We'll do that. They can do both, but it's very rare they do that. Usually it's going to be one or the other. And in this case, it's going to be federal. And so the question becomes, is it just sex trafficking or is there more to this? And I think it's a lot more than sex trafficking. You know, they want to charge him with sex trafficking for pushing Janelle Grant allegedly onto Brock Lesnar for sexual favors in return for Lesnar re-signing with the company. And the idea, I guess, was to get Lesnar, you know, sort of some sexual favors in hopes that he would re-sign and come back to the WWE. But the problem with this is Grant was moved over state lines, but Lesnar never showed up due to inclement weather. But his texts back up, Vince's texts back up, and her texts back up that was actually a plan. So is that technically sex trafficking? Absolutely it is. But where you get into the gray area with all of this is that it never happened. There could have been a plan, but you need something to happen. And sex trafficking charges are very wide. But I don't really think that's a charge. The government may try. They may try that charge, but I don't think they're going to get very far with that. And I base that on the premise of, you know, what we've seen, that there may be more to this. Recently, I was on Lee Cole's podcast, right? Wrestling with the Devil. Please subscribe to Lee. And I just want to discuss, I think, I went on his show and I discussed what I think some of the charges were, but I wasn't very specific, but that's what I want to do here today. And I think this is going to end up being a racketeering case. I really do. A federal Rico racketeering case. Now, for those of you that don't know, the RICO Act, or the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, is basically a United States federal law that provides for extended criminal penalties and civil cause of action for acts performed as part of an ongoing criminal organization. Now, you may say, oh, well, the WWF's not a criminal organization. Well, it kind of technically is when you look at the laws. Under Rico, a person who has committed at least 2 acts of racketeering activity drawn from a list of 35 crimes, 27 federal and 8 state, within a 10-year period can be charged with racketeering if such acts are related in one of 4 specific ways to an enterprise, the enterprise being the WWE. Those found guilty of racketeering can be fined up to $25,000 and sentenced to 20 years in prison per racketeering count. And so here's a list of some of the crimes: gambling, murder, extortion, kidnapping, arson, robbery, bribery, dealing in obscene matter, which I guess would be child porn or whatever, dealing or trafficking controlled substances or chemicals, bribery, counterfeiting, theft, embezzlement, fraud, obstruction of justice, slavery, money laundering, commission of murder for hire, embezzlement of union funds, bankruptcy fraud or securities fraud, criminal copyright infringement, human trafficking, and acts of terrorism. All right. So racketeering, just for those that don't know, is the act of acquiring a business through illegal activity, operating a business with no illegally derived income, or using a business to collect, or excuse me, using a business to commit illegal acts. And that's what's going to stick to Vince. The U.S. government introduced the Racketeering Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act in October of 1907 to really try to contain racketeering. And racketeering can be prosecuted, like I said earlier, at the state or the federal level. Federal crimes of racketeering include bribery, gambling, money laundering, obstructing justice, or criminal investigation, murder for hire. And at the state level, you have racketeering, murder, kidnapping, gambling, arson, robbery, extortion. Basically, all of the same things can be applied at either end of the spectrum. And the enterprise affects commerce across state lines. That's also going to sort of screw with Vince. And basically, that would mean is that the individual took part in racketeering through the commission of at least 2 acts of racketeering activities. Human trafficking offenses are included as racketeering offenses. Number 1, federal prosecutors in the SEC were investigating WWE and McMahon over his payments to women. So the SEC would become securities fraud. And I'm not going to go into all of that today. That's for another show. Number 2, attempting to push Janelle Grant over state lines to have sex with a wrestler. It could very well be human trafficking, right? And once again, I'm going to state something. Company incurred $5.3 million and $7.1 respectively to the expenses related to costs incurred in connection with separate investigation by a special committee created by the company's board. To date, Vince McMahon has paid $17.4 million to reimburse the company for costs that have been incurred and paid by the company. So in other words, he shelled out $17.4 million to all kinds of different women to shut them up. And so what can Vince McMahon really be charged with? You know, security frauds is one, but I'm not going to get into security frauds because that's a whole entire segment in and of itself. So just keep that under your hat. And, you know, I think, like I said, I'm going to stay for the record. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a legal scholar, but based on my knowledge of Rico laws, this is what I think he's going to be looking at. Rico charge 1, racketeering in aid of money laundering. McMahon can certainly be charged with at least a dozen counts of money laundering. And there are 4 degrees at the federal level for money laundering. Degree 4, more than $5,000, Class E felony, 4 years in prison. Degree 3, more than $50,000, Class D felony, 7 years in prison. Degree 2, more than $100,000, Class C felony, 15 years in prison. Degree 1, more than $1 million, Class B felony, 25 years in prison per count. Per count. Now, once again, Vince McMahon handed out $17.4 million. Degree 1, more than $1 million, Class B felony, 25 years in prison. That's my point. That's my point. So what is laundering according to the federal statutes? Well, a person guilty of that knows that the property involved in one or more financial transactions represents the proceeds of a specific criminal conduct with the intent to promote carrying of a criminal conduct or engage in conduct constituting a felony under law, or knowing that the transactions in whole or are a part designed to conceal, disguise the nature of the location, the source, the ownership, or the control of the proceeds of criminal conduct to avoid any transaction reporting requirement imposed by law. So what some of you are going to say off the top of your head to me is, well, the money being transferred wasn't criminal. It's criminal because it was corporate money. That is where you need to put your head. It's not criminal like having affairs with women and giving them gifts and paying them off to shut up. That's if look what they've done to Donald Trump in that regard, right? They're going after him for hush money and stuff like that. But the reason why they went after Trump was because they're saying the hush money came from election donations. Okay. But this is a little different. The problem is he's using corporation money to do this, and that's what makes it illegal. So to date, like we said, he's paid $17.4 million for costs that were incurred by the company. And the thing is, we don't know specifically how many women he's actually paid off, but each individual payment made to these women can be one single charge of money laundering. So if, let's say, there's 20 women, each person is one count. And then you go to how much money he was giving. And we already went through the stats. Degree 4, more than 5,000. Degree 3, 50,000. Degree 2, 100K. Degree 1, more than 1 million. 4 years, 7 years, 15 years, 25 years. And that's where his issue is going to be. And so what many of you may say is, well, he just paid them. So what? How is it a crime? It's a crime because, once again, he used company money to make those payments. He used company money from a publicly traded business. You cannot do that. It doesn't matter if he was paying it back or not. The reality is you just can't legally do that. The second RICO charge, racketeering in aid of wire fraud. Because I'm not sure how he paid some of these people, but the fact is he used corporate money. Now, if he sent somebody a payment through wire transfers, that's wire fraud because he's not using his money. He's using company's money. You can't do that. You just can't. And the problem with wire fraud is it's a very broad criminal charge. And ultimately, I don't think he'll be charged for that. Could he? Yes, but I don't think he will be. Unless, like I said, there's stuff we just don't know about. And the necessary elements required to constitute as an act of wire fraud are the perpetrator of the crime must have intent to defraud somebody, right? Okay, well, we know Vince wasn't doing that. Interstate wire communications were used in the perpetration of the fraud. That he can get nailed on. And 3, it was reasonable to expect that the use of interstate wire communications would be a necessary part of the fraudulent scheme. Now, the definition of interstate wire fraud communications is extremely broad, considering that the wire fraud statutes are all over the place. It may consist of the transmission of words, photos, or sound. It could be transmitted utilizing a landline telephone, a cell phone, a computer, or public internet service, such as an internet service offered at the public library, blah, 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 blah. So in other words, when Vince McMahon is sending these text messages, pimping out Janelle Grant, essentially, that becomes wire fraud. Very basic. But like I said, it's so broad in the scope of what they do. That's just something he could also be charged with. RICO charge number 3, racketeering in aid of human trafficking. For those of you that know, human trafficking is a crime involved in the exploitation of a person for labor, services, or commercial sex. Now, if they're going to charge him with that in regards to Janelle Grant or anybody else, they're going to use it for commercial sex. That's basically what they're going to do. The Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000 and its subsequent reauthorizations recognize and define 2 primary forms of human trafficking. Sex trafficking is the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, obtaining, patronizing, or soliciting of a person for the purpose of commercial sex, in which a commercial sex act is induced by force, fraud, or coercion in which the person induced to perform such act has not attained 18 years of age, or forced labor is recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining a person for labor or services through the use of force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of subjection to the involuntary solitude, peonage, I don't know, debt, bondage, or slavery. So when you think about commercial, that's like prostitution, etc. But if they're going to use this on him, this is why I don't think they're going to be able to get very far with it. Are there predicate acts of this, or is there at least two examples of this? No. In a racketeering or any RICO, you have to have two examples or two instances of the same crime in order to make it a RICO violation. The problem is we only know he did this once, and that's why I don't think they're going to go after him with that. But I know that behind the scenes, everybody's saying, oh, that's what they're going to charge him with. I just don't know if they can get him on that. I always said from day one, how you get Vince McMahon is on financial crimes. That's how you're going to nail him. I just, unless there's something we don't know about, which can be the case, I just don't see that working out. But do I think the feds are going to try to use that charge? Absolutely. But like I said, the problem with me for this charge specifically is that, the feds have to be able to prove that Grant did not want to do this and that she was forced or coerced. It's very hard to prove coercion. And even if she was told to do it, there's such a gray area when it comes to the complicity on Grant's end of things. Force, coercion, like I said, they're going to be tough to avoid for McMahon, but they're also going to be tough to prove. I don't know if at the end of the day what the feds have or what more they may have, but it's going to be hard to prove that. And that's why I think ultimately you're going to end up seeing money laundering, SEC fraud, wire fraud, because those can stick to McMahon a lot easier than human trafficking. And like I said, in RICO acts, you need to demonstrate a pattern of racketeering activity, including at least two or more predicate acts within the specified time frame. Predicate acts sort of encompass a variety of criminal offenses, like extortion, fraud, bribery, and other specified crimes. So I don't think, unless there is, another victim of human trafficking, I don't think they're going to be able to weave that against him. I think they're going to have to stick to financial crimes. And like I said, we have seen this applied to gangsters for a long time. And the problem is that, like I said, you need two sort of predicates of that, or you need two examples of that. And I think, at least with the money laundering, how many women have there been? 5, 6, 7, 10, 15? I mean, I don't know what the exact number is, certifiable number, but we know that this is a patterned history. And we know that this took place in a certain kind of time frame just based on the civil litigation and everything that has sort of been happening in WWE the last 4 or 5 years, specifically really the last 2. And so what does this mean for the Endeavor Group and all of these other groups that are involved in this? They can be complicit in this. And I've always said you have to go back to the civil litigation. And it's more of a sort of a moral argument for me, is that there were a lot of people at the top that knew this was going on. And they didn't step in, they didn't do anything. And I understand why they didn't. But publicly, that is a very bad look. It's a very bad look. But this is so similar to organized crime indictments, it's not even funny. It's not even funny. Just using your phone, stupid thing to do. You always think you're safe using that phone, but there's always a snake in the grass ready to eat the mouse. That's just how it works. And so I don't know what's going to happen, but I do think they're going to use RICO violations because that's what's really going to get him. And this idea that Vince is shocked about these charges is ridiculous. He's not a stupid guy. And the fact that, he spent $17 million of companies' money to pay off people should have been a red flag for everybody. But that's how you cook the books. Okay, we're going to write it off as a salary deferred to X, Y, and Z. And if you look back to during the Ring Boy scandal, they were paying people checks, but not with Vince's name on it, from different corporations. Because that way, if somebody says, oh, well, he paid me off, you can't prove it. because it's coming through sort of a shell corporation or a corporation of a corporation. And that's criminal shit. That's what finance crimes are all about. But I do think he's going to be charged with money laundering. That's how you're going to nail him. And if they don't, and I'm wrong, then I'll be the first to say it. But just like organized crime, you sit at the top for a long time and think you got it all together. And this is just, the odd thing about it is it's just sort of the comparison between somebody like Vince McMahon and John Gotti, just from a financial aspect, or just the government honing in on them. Granted, Vince hasn't suffered the wrath that sort of John Gotti did. Two different guys, but Vince was, for all intent and purposes, the mob boss of the wrestling industry. And if you're curious, you can go down to our playlist. We did a show on the mob and the McMahons. We did a show on Dino Bravo and the mob. But there's a lot of comparisons and contrasts. And I don't want to sit here for an hour doing that, but you can also go over to Wrestling the Devil with Lee Cole III. And you can look at some of the shows that we were on. And Lee and I did a great show where we just talked about the comparisons between organized crime and Vince McMahon. And Vince McMahon ran WWE like he was a gangster. Plain and simple. So that's where I think this is heading. And I just thought that I would come on here and explain sort of the Rico laws and kind of how they act, and how they're worked against somebody. But like I said, this is going to be a lot bigger than I think people realize. And anytime you ask somebody to stop their civil litigation because they want to focus on federal charges, that's huge. That's just absolutely huge. So we'll see what comes of it. But it's going to be interesting. Anyway, do me a favor, like, subscribe, and share. Come back anytime. We will be doing more mob content here in the next couple of days. If you're interested in donating, you can donate at paypal.me Mob Talk Radio, or my Cash App, $ Mob Talk Radio. In the meantime, brand new podcast coming out tomorrow on www.mobtalkradioshow.supercast.com, where we will be talking about the Philadelphia history, part 5, I think we're on, armchair quarterback, mob boss, Q&A, and other tidbits. Have a great day, everybody. And once again, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button.